I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at the expansion of the United States as they saw a territorial expansion during the 1800s and began to grow their empire as they moved forward here as an independent country and celebrated eventually their 100th anniversary of independence from Great Britain. The objectives for this particular section, we'll look at the territorial expansion of the United States. We'll look at the causes and effects of the Civil War and see how American democracy grew in the 1800s, and analyze the impact of economic growth and social reform on the United States. So first off, we'll take a look at what actually is expansionism. Expansionism is the extending of a nation's boundaries beyond its current borders. The policy of expansionism made the United States larger, more diverse, and more economically powerful as it began to compete on the international stage. When we think about how the United States expanded its borders during the 1800s, probably the biggest single expansion in the United States in the history of our country is the Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase was negotiated through the Jefferson administration. He sent our Secretary of State Monroe to France to kind of negotiate that out for the United States. And as a result, we more than doubled the size of the United States per that purchase in the early 1800s. It was actually purchased from Napoleon Bonaparte's government when Napoleon was still the Emperor of France, and Napoleon was kind of distracted by the ongoing events in Europe. He didn't want to continue to commit French resources to securing the borders here in the United States. By 1846, the United States had added Florida, Texas, and Oregon. The victory by President Polk in the Mexican-American War allowed the United States to add California and much of the southwestern United States as well. Three, describe how the electorate changed during the 1800s. In 1800, only white men who owned property could vote. By the 1830s, most white men had the right to vote. Most white and black men had the right to vote by the 1870s. Four, how the expansion of the United States impact the issue of slavery. Pro and anti-slavery forces fought each other whenever a new state entered the Union to determine whether slavery would be legal in the new state or not. Hopefully, as you realize, the United States government, you get 2 Senate seats and representation in the House of Representatives for each state. And every time you had a new state in the United States, that would then upset the balance of power, and particularly in the Senate. So if you had 20 slave senators and 20 anti-slave senators, it would be a balance in the Senate. But then if you had a new state, which got 2 new senators, it could throw off the balance, 22 to 20, and so on. 5, explain how the abolitionist movement gained momentum during the 1800s. William Lloyd Garrison, probably one of the greatest abolitionists in history. He wrote the newspaper The Liberator, and Liberator, hopefully, as you can figure out, is to free slaves or liberate slaves. He wanted to abolish slavery immediately. Former slave Frederick Douglass was a great spokesperson. He had firsthand testimony of the horrors of slavery, and he was well educated. He wrote his own autobiography, and of course, was a champion of the end of slavery and the abolitionist movement. Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, became a best-selling novel. This exposed the horrors of slavery to thousands in the North who had no idea of what was really going on in the South. And remember, the media was so limited during that period of time that transportation was somewhat limited as well. So most people had not traveled outside the North, so they were kind of isolated from the ongoing horrors of slavery in the South. 6, how did involvement in the abolitionist movement help to launch the fight for women's rights? Well, you have Lucretia Mott pictured on the bottom right of that photograph. Elizabeth Cady Stanton with her name underneath her is another of the great women's rights movements. So Mott and Stanton, they were told they could not speak at an anti-slavery convention because they were women. So in 1848, Mott and Stanton organized the very first women's rights convention to address the problems faced by women. They held the Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848, and it's considered to be the unofficial starting point of the women's rights movement. In there, they talked about all men and women are created equal, and they kind of took a lot of the things in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence that kind of just mentioned men but not women, and they kind of added the women in there, and they put forth their Declaration of Rights of Women to kind of advocate for the right to vote and many other rights that they were lacking during this period of time. 27, what were the main differences between the northern states and the southern states? What ultimately caused the southern states to secede from the Union? The South remained largely rural and agricultural, whereas in the North, which had industry and factories, along with the economic differences, obviously the issue of slavery drove a wedge between the two regions. In fact, some argue that the North and the South in the United States developed as distinctively different countries during the 1800s. The division reached a crisis state when in 1860 Abraham Lincoln was elected president. A lot of the southern states and southern leaders thought that Lincoln would look to end slavery. So fearing that he would abolish slavery, they preemptively seceded from the Union with their goal to form an independent country. Question 8, based on this infograph here, summarize the post-Civil War amendments. The 3 post-Civil War amendments abolished, the first one abolished slavery, which is the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment made African Americans full citizens of the United States and also protected the individual rights of all citizens. You should not be denied due process in the United States. Number 15, the 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote. So these are considered to be the post-Civil War amendments. Number 9, what factors helped the United States become an agricultural and industrial leader? Factors included a free enterprise system, which rewarded innovation and entrepreneurship, political stability, private property rights, new technologies such as railroads, inexpensive supply of land, expanding country, immigrant labor coming into the United States. All these factors pushed the growth of the United States forward, and the political stability allowed the government to focus on economic development. 10, head of the Populist Party, impact reform in the United States. Even though the Populist Party, which is a coalition of farmers and city workers, never became a major political party, its platform on reforms, such as the 8-hour workday, eventually became law. So you don't necessarily have to be a strong political party to influence decision-making in the country. 11, how did immigration help economic growth after the Civil War? An increase in immigration led to additional workers and consumers expanding the American economy. Increased immigration also fostered tension between different ethnic groups. And finally, the lesson of reflection. List of steps taken during the 1800s that helped the United States emerge as a world power. Obviously, expansionism and imperialism made the United States a strong country. Diplomatic negotiations, in particular, to purchase the Louisiana Purchase. Military victories, Mexican-American War. Ended slavery, and eventually open borders allowed for people to come into the country, which really helped to see our country expand and grow. Hopefully you enjoyed our short discussion here on the United States during the 1800s. And of course, we don't spend a lot of time in particular on the United States because you do focus quite a bit on that moving forward in your US 1 and US 2 classes. Until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.